I had debated about what to do for my next video. I had, I had one idea which I'm gonna put on the back burner. Probably post that tomorrow. And I want to talk to fans today of the Carolina Hurricanes, Caniacs as they like to be called. And the elephant in the room that's always there for somebody who's my age, around my age, which is that it used to be the Hartford Whalers and they moved to Carolina. Now, Carolina's kind of a tricky one because the perception may be there that I favor or dislike Carolina on both ends. And depending on the situation, over the years, there have been times where I didn't like Carolina. There have been times where I did cheer for them. Now, the number one thing I want to get out of the way is that they made the playoffs in 2009. They also made the playoffs in 2019, and in between, there were numerous seasons where they were close. They'd have good runs. They might have had some good players, but in general, things would just fall apart. It was how things worked with Carolina, and they always seemed to be in a perennial instance where they weren't the worst in the league, so they would never really quite go into a full rebuild, but they weren't good enough to get into the playoffs, so they were just in that no man's land, and their goaltending was always kind of meh. And so this was an issue with Carolina. Now, in 2006, they won their Stanley Cup. And in 2006, I was a fan. And it's funny because in 2009 they were up against Edmonton, and as a Canadian hockey fan, I should have been cheering for the Oilers, and I tried. And as I've said in videos before, I went into game one between Carolina and Edmonton saying, now, am I cheering for Edmonton or Carolina? I know I don't like Edmonton because of all the stuff that happened to the Canucks, but I need to not be, small that way. I need to grow as a fan, and I need to really, make myself see the world in a different way. Then Carolina scored, and I cheered, and I went, crap. Okay, apparently I'm cheering for Carolina. How did this happen? And how it happened was these guys were like the ultimate underdogs. The 05-06 season was bizarre. We came out of a full season of not having a season. And so Carolina wins that first Stanley Cup in the new NHL. And it really was a brand new NHL where scoring was up, skill was encouraged rather than punished, and small players could suddenly be NHL players again. So things changed. And the 2006 Stanley Cup, I was actually pretty happy for Carolina when they won it. Now, when you look at their current roster, I like Dougie Hamilton, draft pick of the Boston Bruins. That was a draft pick that they acquired from Toronto in the Phil Kessel deal. And Hamilton, good offensive defenseman. He wanted too much money. Boston said nope, and they shipped him out. I didn't feel like it was a case of it being Dougie that they were getting rid of as this is too much money. We're not going to do this. He went off to Calgary, and of course Calgary shipped him out to Carolina. But I follow, and I like Dougie Hamilton. Sebastian Aho, his rookie year. I was very sold on him going into his second year. There were some predictions that his scoring might drop, that maybe he peaked a bit. He may not be that elite yet. He may have taken too much too soon. I didn't see that at all. I thought he got better as his rookie year went along, and I thought he was going to make an advance that second year. And then the nerve-wracking part was that first, I want to say 25, 30 games of that second year, he wasn't all that great. And it looked like maybe the naysayers could potentially be right. But it turned out he was a pretty good player, and he's an excellent player. Jacob Slavin and Brett Pesce, I put them right on top of each other because I think of the two of them as like the glue that holds together that blue line. And I've been a huge supporter of Slavin and Pesce. When I did my video on the best defenseman in the league this past summer, I had Slavin in there, and there were some that felt that he was too high up, and there were complaints about where numerous players were, including Yossi and others. But again, when I'm trying to rate everybody, I'm going, okay, I'm not going to have any bias based on who's won an award somewhere. I'm just going to go by who I thought this year was the best. And to me, Slavin was one of the best defensemen in the league. I've been a huge fan of his, and any amount of money that he makes is worth it. Ryan Dzingel, I've been a very vocal fan of Dzingels for the last, I want to say, the whole time this channel's been going, so 3+ years. And from his time in Ottawa through his rough point in Columbus there, and now in Carolina, I think he's somewhat overrated now. I think there's some that expect more goals from him than he's going to provide, but he's a hard worker, and I like him a lot. Eric Howla stands out to me as a guy on their roster who Vegas had to get rid of. They had salary cap issues, and Carolina said, all right, we'll take him. And while he's currently injured and out right now, in the games that he's played, he's been very useful. Of course, him being injured will cause Vegas fans to say, see, that's why we shipped him out. He does seem to have an injury issue that goes on regularly with him. But I like Howla a lot, and I think he's a natural goal scorer. And Jake Gardiner, and I had to put this on the board because it stands out. This is a team that does pretty well defensively. Gardner's a minus 18, so I can kind of understand why Carolina announcers are starting to say some of the things that Toronto fans and announcers were saying over the years. Gardner's had a miserable year so far in Carolina, and I really wanted him to have like this really, really good season so that for reactionary fans that wanted him gone after the other Game 7 against Boston, the other one being this year's as opposed to, it doesn't matter. A Game 7 against Boston, Gardner struggles. So if Carolina plays Boston in the playoffs this year, and I'm not even kidding saying this, I would limit Gardner's ice time. Against Boston, I would limit Gardner's ice time. Boston knows how to beat Jake Gardiner. But I like Gardiner. I do. I think Gardiner is a half decent defenseman. I think he's still got that potential, and I know he's had a miserable season and the numbers don't back me up at all. So those are the guys on the roster currently that I wanted to talk about. I know everybody wants. What about Svechnikov? Show some of his goals. No. I'm not talking about Svechnikov here. Now, historically, Ron Francis is the best known of both the Whalers and the Carolina Hurricanes. His name's been in the news lately for some other reasons, but when we look at him as the player and him as the general manager, I think his time as a general manager in Carolina was underrated. I think that a lot of what Carolina's been able to do over the last year and a half, a lot of that was done by Ron Francis and the way he ran the team. And Ron Francis, the player, a couple of Stanley Cup rings in Pittsburgh, and he, when the team went to Carolina, he came back and had his chance to reclaim a spot in the franchise. And that's the weird part to me was when Hartford traded him, part of the thought process was that Francis wasn't going to win them a cup and they weren't doing much with Francis in the playoffs, so they'd go with Cullen instead of Francis. Pretty sure John Cullen was younger, but it was a bizarre lopsided trade on the wrong side. Of course, Alfie went the other way as well, and Grant Jennings came back, and it was just overall just a disastrous trade for Hartford. And it was seen as part of the problem with Hartford and part of the reason that they moved. Now, a big part of the reason that they moved out of Hartford, and there's no plan to go back, is that they played out of a mall and they didn't attract any fans to the mall to watch them play. Not enough, anyways, to warrant keeping the team there. Ray Whitney is a guy who got better as he got older. Rod Brindamore's on the list as a guy who got better as he got older too. There's a lot of calls for, hey, Brindamore should be in the Hall of Fame. I'm not on that. I could understand why people want to see him in the Hall of Fame. To me, Rod Brindamore was a very good player for a very long time. And he did get better as he got older. But he was never a trophy winner. He wasn't a guy who... And what I mean by that is he wasn't like Hart Trophy, Art Ross, multiple Selkies. He wasn't a guy that you can look at his career and say he was dominant at any one point in time. He was just very good for a very long time. And so that's where, with Hall of Famers, I think the distinction is if you were very good, but you weren't necessarily the greatest, I don't know that the Hall belongs there. There needs to be some kind of a distinction there. And of course, for Canes fans, they know exactly what Brindamore is now behind the bench as a coach. Who knows? Maybe the combination of his coaching career and his playing career means at some point he gets an induction. Artur Serbe will be on there because Artur Serbe, I've done a video on. Loved Artur Serbe. He was my favorite goaltender in Vancouver at the time. And of course, because he was better than everybody else, they got rid of him. They got rid of him because he was short. They felt that him being short meant he was less useful as a goaltender, which was ridiculous at the time. It still looks ridiculous now. And Irbe, of course, took them on that Stanley Cup final run, which was really a lot of fun to watch. Carolina's a team that if they get in the playoffs, they'll win the first round, they'll win the second round. Third round, I don't know. But you know what? They're pretty darn good at getting past the first and second round when they get there. Glenn Wesley was one of my favorite Bruins. Of course, he was acquired by the Boston Bruins as the first-round draft pick that they got with Cam Neely for Barry Peterson. See, people remember Neely for Peterson, but the fact that Wesley was the draft pick that got thrown in, just makes it even uglier. Wesley, who started out as a really good two-way defenseman, by the end of his career, he was a stalwart. He was a veteran. He was a leader. Even when his offense was gone, he was still a really useful defenseman. Justin Williams, he's known as Mr. Game 7 for a reason, if he doesn't necessarily like that terminology. We have yet to see whether or not Williams will actually come back at some point this season. He left the door open for that. Carolina left the door open for that. I don't know that Carolina necessarily needs Williams right now, but you know what? It would not surprise me if shortly after the new year he announces his comeback. Marty Jelena, one of my favorite Canucks of all time, of course, he would end up in Carolina. Had a pretty solid run for Carolina as well. Famously was part of the kid line in Edmonton in 1990 that won a Stanley Cup. I have nothing but good things to say about Jelena, and I know he's still in the game. I know he's had a lot of experience as an assistant. Hopefully he gets a head coaching job at some point. So yeah, those are your Carolina players historically that I looked at and off their current roster. And if there's anybody you're like, well, what about these guys? I'm not mentioning them in this video. Now, currently, if we come back to the current team, they are 12th in goals per game. They are 24th in goals against per game. So when I'm talking about their defense and their goaltending this year, that's why. And when you look at the team save percentage, they're 19th at a .904 save percentage. Now, Reimer, very hot and cold goaltender. Mrazek, I'm still not entirely sold on Mrazek as a long-term starter. And so with Carolina, I'm still on the fence about their goaltending. So while I may cheer for them at times, their goaltending does make me rather nervous. Their power play is at 10th in the league. Their penalty kill is 6th in the league. Their special teams is very good. That's something they sometimes struggled with last year. I believe their power play last year was pretty abysmal at points. So that's been picked up. Mrazek's got a .903 save percentage with 2 shutouts. Reimer, .918 save percentage with a single shutout. But again, consistency from game to game is where I have an issue with these two goalies. For Reimer, it goes back to when he was in Toronto. For Mrazek, it goes back to when he was in Detroit. This isn't something that just came out this year. This is something that's been ongoing with these guys for a long time. They're currently the number 1 wild card in the East as I'm recording this. They're 1 point ahead of Pittsburgh and 4 points ahead of the Rangers. But they've played 29 games, Pittsburgh 28, and the Rangers 27. And when you look at the differential, regulation wins now will decide who does and doesn't make the playoffs. Carolina has 15, Pittsburgh and the Rangers both have 14. So I think sometimes with the Hurricanes, I think there's a knee-jerk reaction that because they were in the Final Four and because they've looked really good at times this year that they're a contender. I think there are times where people pick them as a team that misses the playoffs. I did that before the season started because from 2010 till 2018, didn't mean to knock that down, but I did. From 2010 to 2018, there was no playoffs for Carolina. Very easy for me to say, all right, well, somebody's going to drop out. It'll probably be Carolina. Because, again, with the Islanders with Barry Trotz, I couldn't see it happening. But it's never been a hate thing. There was for me, the one bone of contention I always had with Carolina was going from this absolutely fantastic logo of the Hartford Whalers to this. I still don't like this logo. I'm still not a fan. The double flag that they have on their thirds, I like that one better. And it's on their road jersey, too, which tells me that maybe Tom Dundon will make the right decision, make this the secondary logo, and that double flag, the absolute beauty that it can be, will become the main logo. Because this double flag here, on this bunch of jerk shirt, which I wore for this video, because while I wear jerseys in every other video, I thought, you know what, I'll wear the bunch of jerk shirt, because I paid about, I think it was $35 including shipping for this shirt, for a t-shirt. And it's a t-shirt that I don't wear very often either. So, you know, $35 for a shirt. And again, it was such a big deal because of the storm surge, right? Storm surge that everybody hated. And I got behind it early last year. You guys could look through reviews, look through videos from last year. I got behind it right away. I said, you know what? If it works, great. I don't have any problem at all with it while a bunch of jerks was out there as a thing. So I've been willing to criticize. I've been willing to praise at different points in time, which is part of the other video idea I have that I'm pushing off till maybe tomorrow. We'll see how it turns out. I'm going over in my mind how I might want to do it. But for Carolina, they are still a team that I can see as being vulnerable. Maybe they do fall out of the playoffs. Maybe they get in. they will be very, very dangerous should they get in, because they're young, they're talented, and they are capable of going on a hot streak, as we saw last year when they went all the way to the conference finals before running into the Boston Juggernaut. That being said, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.